Hello, this is Kevin Coulter with Concordia University, MBA 814. This is the final project for Unit 8 on March 10th, 2019. The company I've chosen to evaluate board's governance issues is JP Chase & Company. The issues that we'll be discussing today are ones of independence and tenure. First, we'll be looking at independence, and we'll be looking at the significant influence that JP Chase's board has with Bank One. And Bank One was a merger, a former bank financial institution that was prior to JP that merged with them in the early 2000s. We're also going to see some ties that other board members have to outside firms, which are some starking coincidences. And then we'll be looking at tenure. The average tenure of the board of directors for JP is over 13 years, which is significantly higher than even their peers' average of the S&P 1500. And then we'll be looking at the bylaws a little bit and how they provide undue discretion for the board, that there's greater accountability and oversight that they could be had there. And then lastly, we'll be looking at the lack of refreshments and then the retirement age enforcement for the board. So first, independence. There is a study that was included in my research that was authored by Sun, Land, and Ma in 2014. That study found that the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, passed again in the early 2000s after the fallout from some of the accounting scandals such as Enron, there was a balance that was found that increased costs of boards of directors when the board is more independent. Now, with a lot of the research and study we found in this course, it is that board independence, the more independent you have of a board, generally that is a good thing. Although it's good to have institutional knowledge, having people on the board for many decades in some cases can be good to provide that history and that kind of where have we been and to get where we are now mindset. But this study throws out that there is a balance there, that if you tip too far on the side of independence and less on the side of institutional knowledge, that may yield better results. And in fact, in the studies that they show, did find that those firms did have better financial performance. However, that is balanced against boards that maybe were less independent in the sense that they maybe were closer with management or worked for the company for many years before entering onto the board. And although those firms maybe didn't have as good of financial performance compared to those when they were more independent, the cost to oversee the board and their own governance itself, their own monitoring costs, were a lot lower. And that is really no stretch of the imagination because they're aware of the compliance issues and the specific institutional risk that those organizations have, where a more independent board may see increased costs because they're not as familiar with the firm, and rightfully so. So this is a balance, and I addressed that as well as I could in the paper. And I believe that JP given the level of board independence or lack thereof that they have, are, depending if they know that or not, it could be a conscious decision, are trying to strike that balance. Specifically, on the board today, there are 5 directors out of 12 total. Almost half of the board have ties to Bank One. 4 of the directors were just simply carryovers in that they were on the board of directors for Bank One, in some cases for many years, and then at the point of the merger, they retained their seat on the board with JP and have remained there ever since. The 5th is the CEO and president of JP Chase & Company, Jamie Dimon. He was on the board of directors as well as the chair of Bank One. In addition to that, there are 2 pairs of board members that have ties to the same company that are other than Bank One, so a total of 4 other directors. Now, this may be a coincidence, but I find it to be very striking given the level of prestige that many of the members have at C-suite levels, either presidents of their organizations or chief executive officers or other C-suite level officers, that it is too striking to be a coincidence. So first is William Walden, and he's a current board member of JP Morgan, and is also currently a board member of ExxonMobil Corporation. Now, another board member of JP Morgan is Lee Raymond, who is the most tenured since 1987 of any board member. And he worked for ExxonMobil for 12 years, was their board chair and their CEO. So it seems that there is a coincidence there that they have known each other and maybe have something to do with the fact of William Walden becoming on the board of JP Morgan. Similarly, Stephen Burke is currently a director, or has been a director rather, with Berkshire Hathaway, last there in 2009, as well as currently being a member of the board for JP Morgan. At the same time, Todd Combs, another board member for JP Morgan, is a current employee of Berkshire Hathaway. And again, both members are very high up in that organization and management, so it is likely that they know each other. What's even more striking is that 3 of the 4 of these members, everyone except Todd, sit or chair the corporate governance and nominating committee for JP Morgan. So if they knew each other prior to that, whether they knew each other or not in and of itself may not be an issue. But if you're just a casual onlooker looking at the board of JP Morgan and you're looking to see if the board is independent, these are some of the things that would give even the most novice of investors a little bit of pause. So next, we will be looking at tenure. The average tenure for the board of directors for JP Morgan is about 13 years, over 13 years. There was some literature in the class out of 2017. There is a study with the S&P 500 largest firms that the average for their boards are between 8 and 9 years. So this is obviously significantly higher. There are a couple reasons that are attributed to this. 3 directors at JP Morgan currently have more than 26 years of experience sitting on that very board. And that is taken into consideration any prior service they might have had with Bank One. The longest, again, being Lee Raymond, with over 30 years of experience on the board, and he also serves as the lead independent director. And again, some of the highest tenured individuals were with Bank One, not just the 3 that are mentioned above, some even more than that. So again, giving rise to our first issue of independence, that these are some carryovers that some of the areas we're looking at with tenure may make anyone skeptical. Francis and Lubin is another reference that I had from 2016, and it's another study that looks at longer tenure directors are generally at greater risk to think like insiders. And this makes sense, right? The longer that you are on a board, the longer you are working with management, regardless of what the turnover looks like of the management, you come to understand the culture of the organization, you come to understand the communication, you come to understand the history of the decisions that you yourself have made over potentially many decades, that you become having a vested interest in the firm. And that is a risk. JP Morgan is one that does not have any incentives to enact any type of refreshment of their board when you look at their bylaws. And but this is starting to change, and institutional investors are looking to drive that change. The Corporate Governance and Nominating Committee, per JP Morgan's bylaws, only periodically reviews the board structure and membership and evaluates new members as candidates for the board. The board at JP Morgan defines a range of directors versus a set number anywhere between 8 and 18 directors. And again, currently they're at 12. So again, rather having a fixed number at any time, if the board doesn't want to refresh someone that's retiring, they have no incentive for themselves to look for new members or to have any type of a contingency plan if someone were to unexpectedly pass away, let alone an expected retirement. On the other side, though, if they did want to grow the board without having to remove anyone, they do have that option as well. But because JP Morgan also doesn't have any type of monitoring structure for the board of director seats themselves, that also just kind of gives rise to the fact that this board is its own entity and they are controlling who goes in and out. So next we'll look at overall some of the resolutions of everything we've just discussed. The first, my recommendation would be to amend the tenure policy to explicitly state why and when someone should remain on the board past the age of 72. It is in their bylaws that 72 is the official age of retirement. However, because the board also has a policy to consider those that are past the age of 72 with an increase in life expectancy to stay on the board, they don't really have any mechanisms or controls in place to say what is keeping that person on the board other than just their experience or the fact that they have been in the role for a while or the fact that they're chairing some of the various committees that include board refreshment. So I think that they either need to stick firm with an age of 72, or they need to have greater transparency as to why members are staying past that age and specifically state what contributions are they bringing to benefit the board, to benefit the company, and most importantly, to benefit their investors. Next is to require annual performance evaluations of all of the individual directors. Again, this is not something that JP Morgan does today. If the board is serious about independence, and I think that there are some independence issues that they should be looking at to become more independent and less dependent on the institutional knowledge of Bank One and others, that again, coming back to an idea that proving your worth on the board. It's not just in who you know, it's in what you are doing for the shareholders and for the company. And lastly is to institute a tenure limit of no more than 20 years. This will help drive down the tenure of about 13 years on the board and bring it more in line with others. Now, although this might be a radical idea, and I think one that would be given a lot of pushback if actually brought up with the board, a lot of other large organizations in the last 3 to 5 years have enacted similar policies, including General Electric and Target. Costco is another one, BlackRock, and State Street. And again, going back to some other ideas before, these are also firms that their investors are the ones that are actually demanding this change. It isn't coming from within the board. And I think for these changes to take effect, they're going to need to get pressure from shareholders. And whether it's activism to try to remove people at the next annual meeting that are up for election, or just to demand that greater transparency that we've been looking for. It shouldn't go unnoticed that JP Morgan is one of the best known brands in the world, and they are by no means struggling financially. Their stock performance is doing extremely well and has continued to grow, especially in the past 10 years, like many companies, since we've seen an expansion in the economy. And that has continued with JP Morgan, and they do a lot of good things. But my position with, I think, some lack of independence on their board is that if you're an investor in one of the best known brands in the world, you demand the best, and investors should be demanding that. With JP Morgan, I think that there is greater potential that they could be achieving, and with these changes, I believe that they will start to see some of them. I'd like to thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoyed this presentation. Have a wonderful day.